Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. The Visitor. The day my uncle died, I received a package wrapped in a brittle, yellowing cloth. It was my inheritance, though I had no idea why he left it to me. Uncle Ezra and I were never close, and in fact, we hadn't spoken in years. Still, I felt an uneasy pull when the courier handed me the heavy box, his expression flat, as if he had seen too many similar deliveries. When I tore off the cloth, what greeted me was an old, weathered painting. The frame was intricate, almost Baroque in design, but the canvas was unnervingly plain, a dark, gloomy landscape with a solitary, distant figure standing near a forest. I couldn't make out any details of the figure, only its outline. Yet something about it sent a chill running down my spine, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to notice it properly. I hung it up in the study, thinking it might grow on me, or at the very least, it would give the empty room some character. Over the next few days, I couldn't help but notice the figure more and more. Was it just my imagination, or had it moved slightly? At first, I dismissed it, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, shadows shifting in the room. But the longer I looked, the closer the figure seemed to come. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat with a glass of wine, staring at the painting as the sunset dimmed the room. The figure had unmistakably shifted, now closer to the edge of the trees, emerging from the shadows. I rubbed my eyes and leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't remember the figure having a face before, but now there was something vague, an impression of eyes that seemed to follow me. Was it paranoia? I snapped a photo with my phone, comparing it to one I had taken when I first received it. The difference was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me think of the figure in the painting, moving ever so slowly toward me. My thoughts churned. Why would Uncle Ezra, a man I barely knew, leave me something so eerie? What was the connection? I thought about calling my mother, but we hadn't spoken since Ezra's funeral. Besides, I didn't want to sound ridiculous, frightened by a painting like a child afraid of the dark. The following morning, after a restless night, I made myself stare at the painting again. The figure had advanced further. It now stood at the forest's edge, closer to the clearing. My hand shook as I grabbed my phone, quickly opening the camera to document the change. I zoomed in on the figure, trying to discern anything beyond the vague human shape. There were still no distinct features, but a wave of dread coursed through me, as if it were somehow aware of my scrutiny. Later that day, I heard a knock at my door. It startled me. For a moment, I thought perhaps the figure had finally arrived. But it was only the deliveryman, dropping off an old letter from Uncle Ezra's estate. I ripped it open, desperate for some explanation. Inside, there was only a note scribbled in his shaky handwriting: "Don't look too closely. You're already seeing too much." My heart sank as I looked back at the painting. The figure was now halfway across the field, and for the first time, I could see that it was not entirely human. After Uncle Ezra's cryptic note, I couldn't shake the suffocating sense of dread creeping into every corner of my house. The painting seemed to throb with its own malevolent energy, even when I wasn't looking at it. It became impossible to ignore. Every morning, I'd find the figure in the painting closer, the gap between us shrinking. It was now standing on a dirt path that wound its way through the field. In the growing light of dawn, its form became clearer. Limbs too long, legs and arms bent at unnatural angles, draped in something that resembled cloth, though it was frayed and tattered. I didn't dare look at its face, at least, not closely. I kept the room dim, the curtains drawn, but the figure's approach was relentless. Each morning it inched forward, taunting me. I called my mother that afternoon, desperate for some kind of explanation. She sighed heavily on the other end of the line, her voice strained. "Your uncle wasn't well, love," she said. "He started losing himself toward the end. He was obsessed with that painting. I never understood it, but it was like it had a hold on him. He wouldn't let us sell it. Why did he leave it to me, then? What does it mean?" I was pacing, my heart racing, eyes darting toward the study door as if the painting itself were listening in on the conversation. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "But I think you should get rid of it." Ezra tried, but every time he threw it out, it somehow came back. I hung up, my hands trembling. My mother's words confirmed what I had feared. This painting wasn't just art, it was a trap. Uncle Ezra had been haunted by it, and now it was my turn. I marched into the study, determined to end this. I tore the painting from the wall, gripping the heavy frame with both hands, and shoved it into the hallway. I threw open the front door, dragging the cursed thing out into the backyard. But when I tried to lift it into the fire pit, it felt unnaturally heavy. No matter how hard I pushed or pulled, it wouldn't move past the threshold. Exhausted, I collapsed on the ground, staring up at the sky as twilight began to descend. My head pounded, and the darkness seemed to bleed from the edges of the painting into the world around me. I left it outside, but when I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I found myself walking toward the study, as if something was pulling me. The door was ajar, creaking softly on its hinges. I hadn't left it open, I was sure of that. And when I stepped inside, the painting was back on the wall. The figure, now only a few steps from the front of the house, its body twisted and grotesque, loomed in the foreground. Its head was tilted, its hollow eyes fixed on the door. My door. My phone rang, jolting me back into the present. It was my mother again, her voice frantic. I had a dream about Ezra. He warned me. He said, "Don't open the door. Whatever you do, don't let it inside." I didn't say a word. My gaze was locked on the figure in the painting. It was closer now, its claw-like hand outstretched, reaching for the front porch steps. The detail was sharper than before, more vivid. It almost looked like the house in the painting wasn't a random house anymore. It looked like my house. There was a knock at the front door. The knock echoed through the house, reverberating in my chest. My heart pounded, each beat heavier than the last. I stood frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the painting. The figure's hand was now on the door, my door, and the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The twisted house in the background, the peeling paint, the cracked windows, it wasn't just any house. It was mine. The knock came again, louder this time, as if whoever, or whatever, was behind the door had grown impatient. I stepped toward the hallway, trying to steady my breath. My mother's words rang in my ears, "Whatever you do, don't let it inside." But the compulsion to answer was overwhelming, a pressure building in my skull, urging me forward. The house was silent except for my own footsteps, my socked feet brushing against the cold hardwood as I moved. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and strained. No response. The air seemed thicker, the room darker, as though the shadows were swallowing the light from the corners. I crept closer, the weight of something unseen pressing down on me with every step. The door loomed large now, just a few feet away. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, knowing deep down that I was crossing a line I could never come back from. My fingers brushed the cool metal just as a soft whisper came from the other side of the door. A voice that was familiar and yet terribly wrong. "Let me in." I gasped, stumbling back. I knew that voice, it was Uncle Ezra's. But it couldn't be. He was dead, buried miles away in a damp, forgotten cemetery. The door shuddered as the knocking came again, more insistent, more frantic now. The voice, twisted and warped, spoke again, this time louder, angrier. "Let me in." I bolted back to the study, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I pressed my back against the door, trying to block out the knocking that now seemed to echo from every wall of the house. The painting. I forced myself to look at it again, heart hammering in my chest. The figure was at the door in the painting, but this time, something was different. Its face, or what passed for one, had changed. Where once there had been vague shadows, there were now features, sharp, sunken eyes, a crooked grin that stretched too wide across its face. It looked like Uncle Ezra, but warped, as though someone had twisted his features into a grotesque mask. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of the painting, needing some evidence that this was happening, that I wasn't losing my mind. But as I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. The painting was blank. Nothing but a black void where the landscape once was. The figure was gone. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my panic. It was another message, this time from an unknown number. "You've seen too much. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. The knock came again, this time softer, more deliberate. I glanced at the painting once more, my stomach twisting into knots. The house in the image had changed again. The front door was open now, and the figure, the thing wearing my uncle's face, was no longer there. There was only one place it could be. Suddenly, the room grew ice cold, and a breath of air brushed against my neck, like someone, or something, was standing right behind me. The last thing I heard before the lights flickered out was a soft, rasping whisper in my ear, "I'm inside." I spun around, but the room was empty. Or at least, it seemed that way. The darkness clung to every corner, shadows pulsating like living things. My heart raced, each beat thundering in my ears. That whisper, so close, so intimate, still echoed in my head. I'm inside. But inside where? My house? My mind? A cold draft swept through the room, causing the hair on my arms to rise. I glanced at the door, now wide open. I hadn't opened it. Something had. My body refused to move, paralyzed by the sheer dread pooling in my gut. Then I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their feet on the floorboards outside the study. The sound grew louder, creeping closer. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing against my lungs. I knew what was coming. I knew it before I could even bring myself to face the truth. The figure from the painting wasn't just in the house, it was here for me. I had to act. I grabbed the painting, yanking it off the wall and throwing it onto the floor with a thud. The frame cracked under the impact, and for a brief moment, I thought I could destroy it. I needed to. This thing, whatever it was tied to the painting. I was sure of it. I frantically searched for something to smash the canvas with, my hands trembling as I tore through the drawers in the desk. A letter opener, sharp, heavy, would have to do. My breath came in short gasps as I crouched over the painting, raising the letter opener high, ready to plunge it into the canvas. But just as I was about to strike, I saw it. The painting had changed again. The figure was back, no longer outside, no longer on the porch. It was inside the house. Standing in the hallway, just beyond the study door. But it wasn't alone. There was another figure. Me. I was in the painting, standing in the same room, holding the letter opener, frozen in place just like I was now. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the twisted grin spread across the figure's distorted face, its long, bony hand reaching for the version of me in the painting. I dropped the letter opener. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. I was terrified that if I did, it might trap me inside somehow, that I would be lost to that world. My thoughts spun wildly, unable to focus on a single solution. The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. The handle turned. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting from the painting to the door, unsure of where the real threat lay. The door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing nothing but more darkness. But I felt it, the presence, the weight of something vile. I could feel its eyes on me, feel the malevolence in the air. And then, out of the shadows, the figure stepped through. It wasn't Uncle Ezra, not anymore. Whatever this thing was, it wore his form like a mockery, its twisted limbs too long, too misshapen. The face, a grotesque version of his, was a mask of decay and malice. Its grin spread impossibly wide, revealing rows of blackened teeth. It moved toward me, slow, deliberate, savoring the fear radiating from my frozen body. I told you not to look too closely, the thing rasped, its voice a grotesque parody of my uncle's. You've seen too much. I stumbled backward, my legs barely responding. I felt the wall behind me, trapping me in place. The figure was closer now, the air around it crackling with a cold that chilled me to my bones. I looked toward the painting, desperately hoping for some escape, some clue. But what I saw instead was horrifying. The version of me in the painting, the one I had seen earlier, was gone. The study in the painting was empty now. And the front door in the painting, once open, was shut tight. There was no escape. The figure reached for me, its hand cold and damp as it brushed against my skin. The room swirled with darkness, and I felt a pull, as though the world was folding in on itself. My vision blurred, my mind unraveling as the boundaries between this reality and the one inside the painting began to dissolve. The last thing I saw was the painting shifting again, the figure in the background now gone. And I understood, too late, what Uncle Ezra had meant. The painting wasn't showing the future. It was trapping it. As the darkness consumed me, I realized I was no longer the observer. I was part of the painting now. And the figure had moved on, looking for its next victim. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Reflection. I was never one to believe in superstition. A reflection, I always told myself, was just that, a mirrored image, a trick of light bouncing off a surface. But after that night, I'm not so sure. It started in the bathroom. I was brushing my teeth like I always did before bed. My reflection moved with me, as it should. But something felt off. It was subtle at first, a fleeting sensation of disconnect. When I leaned in closer to spit out the toothpaste, it lingered, watching, just a fraction longer than it should have. I blinked, and the mirror blinked back. Except, the reflection didn't blink at the same time. It blinked first. It felt like a trick of my tired eyes, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I stood there, frozen, staring at my own face. Had I imagined it? Was I overthinking? The rational part of my brain was already trying to excuse what I'd seen. Maybe I was tired. Maybe it was the angle of the light, a distortion of the glass. But then it happened again. The reflection blinked first. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. There was no explanation for what I saw. There it was, clear as day, my face, calm, indifferent, waiting for me to blink next. I took a step closer to the mirror, heart pounding. For a long time, we just stared at each other. I moved a hand up slowly to touch the surface, expecting the cold hardness of the glass. But before my fingers could make contact, the reflection smirked. That smirk wasn't mine. It was slight, but unmistakable. It curled at the edges of its mouth, a mocking twitch. My breath turned ragged, my skin prickled with an icy dread. I took a step back, shaking my head, but the reflection stayed where it was, staring, that smirk growing wider. No, I whispered under my breath. No. This isn't real. But the reflection heard me. I saw it lean in, and though I hadn't moved, it closed the distance between us. It was like the space between me and the mirror was vanishing. I didn't know what to do. My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of my trance. I turned, grabbing it, fumbling with it just to have something to hold on to. When I looked back at the mirror, the reflection was back to normal, no smirk, no hesitation. It blinked with me, moved with me, everything perfectly in sync. I felt my knees weaken, my head spinning. "You're imagining things," I muttered to myself, trying to force some reason into the situation. But something deep within me knew that the reflection wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to blink again. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smirk, that taunting twist of my own lips in the reflection. I kept turning it over in my mind, trying to rationalize it, explain it away. Maybe it was just a nightmare I'd had while awake, a hallucination brought on by fatigue. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The next morning, I avoided the mirror completely. I didn't even step into the bathroom. I brushed my teeth in the kitchen, washing my face with cold water from the sink. But it wasn't enough. Everywhere I went, every reflective surface, windows, screens, even the puddle on the sidewalk outside, I felt watched. I forced myself to look away, but in the corners of my vision, there was always a flicker, a shadow, something just out of reach. I knew it was absurd, but the paranoia clung to me like a second skin. By evening, I convinced myself to return to the bathroom. I had to face it, or it would never leave me alone. The mirror was just glass. My reflection was just light. This was all in my head. I repeated these thoughts like a mantra, one step at a time, until I was standing in front of the mirror again. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to look. I stared down at the sink, gripping its cold edges until my knuckles turned white. Then, slowly, I lifted my gaze. It was me, just me. The same brown eyes, the same tousled hair, the same weary expression. My reflection blinked in perfect sync. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief washed over me. Maybe it really had been in my head. Maybe I was just overtired, my mind playing tricks. I smiled awkwardly at myself, feeling a bit foolish, and turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, so quiet I thought it might have been the wind. But it wasn't. It came from behind me. From the mirror. Wait, it said. I froze. The word hung in the air like a ghost. Slowly, my eyes shifted back to the mirror. The reflection was still smiling, but now, it wasn't my smile. It was its own. A sick, twisted grin that stretched wider and wider, far beyond the boundaries of what a human face could manage. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The reflection didn't respond, but it stepped forward, closing the gap between us, even though I hadn't moved. The room felt colder, the light dimmer, as if the air itself had thickened. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out to touch the mirror. My fingers met the surface, but it wasn't the cool, solid glass I expected. It felt soft, like skin. I jerked my hand back, horrified. The reflection, still grinning, raised its own hand to the glass, pressing its palm against where mine had just been. Its lips moved, but no sound came. Then, with a slow, deliberate blink, it whispered, "Soon." Panic surged through me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a bottle of shampoo, barely noticing as it hit the floor with a dull thud. The reflection didn't flinch. It just stood there, watching, waiting. My hands were trembling, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. I had to escape whatever this was. I turned and ran, slamming the door behind me, but I knew, deep down, it was too late. It was waiting. And it wouldn't stop until it was free. The door slammed behind me, but the weight of the moment clung to my skin like humidity. I couldn't shake the image of that thing in the mirror, my reflection twisted into a mockery of myself. I tried to catch my breath, tried to calm down, but my mind was reeling. The reflection, no, the thing, was waiting. It had spoken, and I could still hear its voice, faint and echoing in the back of my skull, "Soon." I avoided the bathroom entirely after that. I tried to carry on like nothing was wrong, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every reflective surface became a threat, every window, every phone screen. I covered the mirrors in my apartment with sheets and towels, blocking them out, but it didn't help. The reflection was always there, lurking just beyond the veil, waiting for the next chance to break through. The worst part was the dreams. Each night, I found myself standing in front of that same mirror. The room was bathed in a sickly, yellow light, and the reflection was always waiting. It didn't blink. It didn't smile. It just stared, eyes dark and empty, a void pulling at the edges of my sanity. And every time I blinked in the dream, the reflection moved closer, its face a mask of something alien, something wrong. One night, I jolted awake just as the reflection pressed its face against the glass, whispering, "I'm here." I was unraveling. Sleep deprived and paranoid, I finally decided to confront it once and for all. I couldn't keep running from my own reflection forever. If this thing was trying to get to me, I needed to face it, before it broke free. I grabbed a hammer from the drawer, determined to smash the mirror and end this nightmare. I stood before the bathroom door, hammer in hand, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. With one deep breath, I swung the door open. The bathroom was just as I left it, cold, quiet, with the mirror still covered by the towel. I moved forward, trembling, my fingers grazing the edge of the towel. I yanked it down. My reflection stared back at me, but this time, it didn't move. It just stood there, waiting for me to blink. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unsettling calm. I raised the hammer, ready to shatter the glass. Before I could strike, the reflection raised its hand, mirroring my movement. But something was different. The way its fingers curled around an invisible handle, the way it tilted its head. It had a hammer too. My blood ran cold. I froze, mid-swing, staring in horror as the reflection mimicked me perfectly. My chest tightened with the creeping realization, I wasn't in control anymore. It was. Then it blinked first. Again. The crack of glass breaking filled the room, but it wasn't from my side. The reflection swung its hammer down on the other side of the mirror. A jagged line split across the surface. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the crack widened, spiderwebbing outwards. The reflection grinned, that same grotesque, impossible grin I had seen before. It tapped on the glass from the inside. Soon, it whispered again, the sound filling the air like a hiss. Before I could react, the crack began to widen. The surface of the mirror rippled like water, the image of my reflection warping and twisting. Then, with a sickening crunch, it stepped through the broken glass. It pulled itself out, one hand first, then another, its body bending and twisting unnaturally as it emerged from the frame. I fell back, scrambling away as it loomed over me. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was here. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering in my chest as the thing stepped fully out of the shattered mirror. It moved with a grotesque fluidity, limbs too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Its skin, which should have been mine, looked like an imitation, stretched too tight, pale, and waxy. But the face. That face was mine, twisted into a mockery of every expression I'd ever made. It stood before me, head tilted slightly, watching me with hollow, sunken eyes. A silence hung in the air between us, the kind of silence that presses against your skull, begging to be broken. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat was dry, choked by terror. It took a step forward, and with each move, the air seemed to grow colder, the room darker. The crackling sound of glass breaking echoed with every shift of its body, as if it still carried the shards of the mirror inside its skin. You're not real, I whispered, forcing the words past my trembling lips. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. This thing had crawled out of my reflection. It had crossed a line that was never supposed to be crossed. It smirked, a slow, deliberate stretch of its lips that sent a wave of nausea through me. "Oh, I'm real," it said in a voice that sounded almost like mine, but distorted, deeper, darker, dripping with mockery. "I've always been real. You just didn't see me. Not until I wanted you to." I tried to stand, but my legs refused to move. It took another step closer, crouching down to meet my eye level. Its breath smelled of cold glass and decay. "Do you know what happens when a reflection wants out?" It whispered. "It waits. It waits for you to blink. And when you do..." It reached out, a twisted hand brushing the side of my face, cold as death. "It takes your place." I flinched, jerking away, but it followed my movement effortlessly, a mirror once again. "No," I said, louder now, my voice shaking with panic. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." But the reflection grinned wider, that grotesque grin I had come to dread. "You're already too late," it said, and the words sank into me like knives. I lunged, desperate, swinging the hammer wildly at its head. The sound of impact echoed in the small bathroom, but when I looked, it wasn't the thing's head I'd hit, it was mine. A flash of disorientation, a sharp, burning pain in my skull, and then darkness flooded my vision. The hammer clattered to the floor, and I collapsed, my world spinning. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes? Hours? When I woke, the room was quiet. Too quiet. I lifted my head, vision still blurry, but I could see the bathroom mirror from where I lay. The reflection was gone. My reflection was gone. I staggered to my feet, my head throbbing, and approached the mirror. The glass had mended itself, the jagged cracks that had split it moments ago now smooth and whole. I raised my hand to touch it, and as I did, I saw my reflection again, but it was different. It wasn't moving with me. My heart sank as I realized the truth. It was standing still, watching me, that eerie smile tugging at its lips. And then, slowly, my reflection blinked. First. The thing on the other side grinned. "Your turn," it whispered. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was my reflection, stepping forward, this time from my side of the glass. I woke up in the mirror. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.